Hi guys, it's Paul back with another video, and in today's video we're going to go through how to understand how the levers operate and how they hinder us or help us, how the anti-picks are a problem, how to understand and read the lock as such. So hopefully by the end of this video, for those of you that are not already up to speed, this will make a lot of sense at the end. So let's roll with it. Okay, so levers, detainers, they can be grouped into various different ways. Now, you just heard me use the terminology detainer. A detainer is this one at the very top. Now, often many people call them a lever, and you know, it's easily done. You'll probably find in this video that I will refer to them by mistake as a lever, but they are the actual name for these is detainer. Okay, now if I bring one into shot a bit closer, okay, what you can see is that's our pivot hole, so that sits on a post, which then allows that lever, there you go, I've just said it now, detainer, to actually be moved up and down. Okay, this here is our gate. Okay, now the stump, which is over here, well, prior to lifting or picking or using the key, the detainer, the stump, sorry, is pressing or resting here. Okay, and when the correct key is put in, this will lift up, allowing the stump to pass through. And although it's not a big opening, it's enough to allow the linkage to release and pull the bolt, allow the bolt to be pulled back. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. Okay, so here we have them in, there's 9 different heights in these detainers. Now I've got a lock here which operates on the detainer range. Okay, now this is the 3G110, okay, or just the 110 commonly referred to. Now this is considered a locksmith's nemesis. Okay, now there is guys out here can pick these open, and you do find that these are not the straightforwardest of pick. Okay, now there isn't really, in terms of the detainers, much of an issue because of the detainers as such, because there's not much in the way of anti-picks that cause you too much problem, but getting wires in there and being able to move backwards and forwards is quite an issue. There is a slight little deformity in each of the detainers, which is supposed to act like a anti-pick, but they're not extremely deep, so you can sort of work out what's picked and what's not. But it's the way that the lock actually works with the linkages in the back. Typically in a normal lock we would rotate that curtain, it would lift the detainer. Okay, so that detainer would lift, the same with the other 5, they'd all lift to their correct height. The curtain, this round portion here, would continue on its path to go round, which then interacts with the linkage system here, and then when everything's aligned and moved into the correct position, it then allows this stump to, which is pivoted from down here, it allows that to then move into the gap that would be created by that gate, as we call it. Okay, now when this stump is pressed into these, when you're curtain picking, when this is pressed into here and you're manually lifting these up and down with a wire, what you'll tend to find is they're quite heavily sprung. Okay, so you've got a lot of pressure pushing them detainers down. Okay, so first up we've got to overcome that with varying our tension. Okay, secondly, the stump, which is this part here, doesn't really have much of a sharp edge to it, which would then dig into that detainer and I suppose if it did, it would probably cause us a few more problems in all fairness, but there's nothing really for these to sort of dig into, and because they're brass, it will just kind of keep slipping down. Okay, so you'll constantly have to fight with this lock to keep these detainers in the position where they are, and you'll touch one detainer and then the others will drop down, so it's quite a cat and mouse with these when picking. So it's not so much overcoming the detainers, it's just keeping everything balanced and then taking the information that you're getting from this lock and remembering that it's passing through multiple linkages, so by the time you get to here where you're feeling everything and your wire, you've got to relate that from where all the other components that have taken up the tension throughout that lock. So feedback isn't the greatest necessarily, but definitely doable. So that's the detainers at the back. Now moving on, so these type here, as you can sort of see, they have a H shape in the center of them, and they are referred to as H levers. Now with these do not pivot. Where these would pivot on a post, these ones actually slide up and down in the lock. Okay, so there'll be a post on here and a post here, and then that spring will be pushing it down so it's on its lowest point. The key would go in, okay, and then as it goes round, it will slide this lever up to its right height and align in that gate, and this is what we call the gate. Okay, so this is like the what I call them as a belly resting point for the stump. The stump's resting here, so as this lever goes up, the stump can then pass through here and drop into this pocket, which is our open position. So this is in our locked position, the stump passes through here, this is our opening position. Okay, and I'll show that in a little bit more detail shortly. So yeah, these actually pivot up and down, or slide up and down, as opposed to pivoting. So these create their own kind of picking hindrances, because obviously the feedback you get back, as well as you can notice, they're quite smooth, not much in the way of anti-picks, apart from when you get to lever number 4. I mean, there is somewhat of a small anti-pick in 3, which is this little indent up here, but I'll go into anti-picks a little bit further on in the video. So it's really from position 4 through to position 7 where you get your anti-picks. But you do find that the tension required and to get these locks to interact is quite tricky, and once you start getting them interacting, keeping these levers up as well can be a bit of an issue, because obviously they're, instead of being resting, they're being pushed down, and the stump is kind of digging into these, and the friction, there isn't as much friction to hold them up as say one of these levers that we'll come onto. So again, that causes its own problem because of gravity. The pressure, the force being pushed down on them is greater, as opposed to the pressure that if they were being pivoted, because they're being sprung from the back edge, which is where the pivot is, where these is being pivoted and tensioned from the center. So the force is a lot greater, in my experience. Other people will probably argue that point, you know, and you're free to interpret as you like, but that is what I find, and I've got my own method for picking these, and it is something that I teach. With all of this is stuff that I do teach, and I'll go into far more detail and more of an explanation, and paperwork and everything is given to the attendees with all of this information and on the levers and other bits and pieces. But okay, so we've got our detainer, we've got our H lever, and then we have what is classed as our open-ended lever. Okay, now they're classed as open-ended for the obviously reason that at the end they're open. So here is our gate, our opening for our stump to pass through. Okay, these are open-ended again for obvious reasons, and another open-ended lever here. Now, picking a lock with these types of levers are a lot easier in my opinion. Okay, the reason being, as I've already said, with these, they're being pivoted from the back. The tension typically with these is less severe because when they're on the pivot post and the spring at the back here, once they've got to a certain point, the pressure doesn't seem to be as severe, and typically the stump has always got a nice amount of lever resting on it. And because of the way the stump is shaped, when you lift the lever, okay, so you imagine that there's a lot more surface area in contact in almost like in a chamfered angle, whereas on here it's flat. So you've kind of got, okay, you imagine that, you know, you put them together, it's two fairly smooth surfaces, they just want to slip past each other, whereas these, when it comes down, it's kind of got a resting place. Unless you pull it out too far, then it'll pivot down and drop out of the way. I'll try and put an animation in if I've got one to hand. So, open-ended style of lever. Now, the principles with all of these are exactly the same. You want to lift these levers to the right height to allow the stump to pass through their gates. So here, it wants to pass through here. On these detainers, the stump wants to pass into these little notches in the end of the detainer, and then on here we have our closed lever for the obvious reason that there's no opening. The stump sits in this pocket here, in these pockets, okay, so in the lock position the stumps are sitting in this part, and then when they're open the stump passes through this gate into this pocket here, which is our opening position. Okay, now these ones are open-ended and they're here for a reason, and I'll go through them a little bit further in the video. So I'm just going to move these out of the way momentarily to give us a little bit more room to bring stuff in. Okay, so I've showed on this lock. So this is a ASEC Vital or TSS lock. Okay, so this is our key. So as you can see, we have a 7-stepped key. Bring it in this way. Okay, so position 1 is here, position 2 is stepped up slightly, position 3, position 4, position 5. So that's all that we require to open the lock on the left hand position. But then you'll notice at position 5 there's a position 6 and a position 7. Okay, so if we cut this key in half, you'll notice it's symmetrical. This particular lock works on ABA pattern. Okay, so positions 3 and 5 are always going to be the same height. So in this case, these two long upstands is our position 3 and position 5. Okay, so if you look here, position 1 when it's left hand throw here, and then position 1 when it's right hand throw is here. They're exactly the same height. Position 2 on the left, position 3 on the right hand throw, position 4, position 3 on the left hand, position 3 on the right hand, and then position 4 on our, well, for left hand and right hand. Okay, so that's our central line to why we need to have the key symmetrical for it to be able to work left hand and right hand. Now if we had a 9-stepped key, okay, now I'm just going to bring in a 9-stepped key now. Okay, so this is our 9-stepped key. So we've got our position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4 deep, position 5, position 6, position 7, position 8, position 9. Okay, so these keys are both for 5 lever locks, believe it or not. But you'll notice that this one looks a lot wider as opposed to this one. So typically the locks tend to be a little bit thicker on a 9-step key for obvious reasons, or the levers will be thinner to compensate, okay, or a mixture of both. So if we take this lock for example, okay, and we compare if the camera will pick it up, you might not even still be able to tell, but the actual key bits on the gold key are a tad thicker than on the silver key. So on this particular lock, although the key still has to be symmetrical, and that is our center line, okay, so that's our center line, the key's still symmetrical, but in order for it to work, you have to extend the key slightly to put in all of the heights. So our position 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 on the left, on the right hand side when we're using the key, and then on the left we've got our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So hopefully that makes things a little bit easier to understand. So position 3 and 5 don't need to be the same on a 9-stepped key, but on a 5-stepped key, 7-stepped key, sorry, the levers are what we call ABA pattern. So position 3 and 5 will always be the same. So this is ABA pattern, and so when we turn the key, we've got this silver disc, okay, which is what we call our curtain. And the reason it's called a curtain, I'll go into a little bit more detail after I've demoed this. But we're going to insert our key, we rotate the key, and you'll start to see them levers. Okay, so we've got that one just there sitting really low. When we start to turn it, they start to lift, everything starts to move, and then we've got an align, well, our gate has now opened. Here is our stump, this silver little notch, this square. That's now allowed a path for that to pass through until it comes to rest in that pocket, and that's our lock in the open position. And when we come to lock it, again we rotate it, then levers start to lift, they get to the right height, which again allows that stump to pass back through until it comes to its resting position. Then the levers will start to drop as the key comes further around. Everything's in its resting place, and now that lock won't open because it's now secured by the stump. Now to see if I can simplify it a little bit, so okay, so I've taken the levers off of this and try and make it a little bit more easier to sort of see what's happening. So we've got our lever, so I've only got one lever in here, okay, so that stump here, this bar, doesn't want to go, okay, so we use the right key, that then wants to get to a certain position. Should have done this a little bit of a different way. Okay, so as we start to rotate that, that starts to pull the stump through the gate, and we've got our open. Okay, so if I remove that lever, okay, so this is our curtain. The reason the lock has a curtain is years ago when they didn't, okay, you was able to look up into the hole and work out what your highs, your lows or your readings were and decode the lock, so they weren't secure. So to combat that, a curtain was introduced. Okay, so once that's in place and we have our cap back on, okay, that seals the hole and there's no room for you to be able to see anything to make opening easier. And then on the back of the curtain, some locks have different variations of this, but the method of what it does is the same. Okay, so you'll see that little tab on the back of that disc, and this opening here, this V-shaped looking opening, okay, is what we call our talon. So when the right key has lifted the levers, as this comes round, okay, that tab, you can see there, okay, where that tab is, so it's at the 6 o'clock position on there. It will pass through into the talon, and then that will drag the bolt back. So that is how it does work in a simple sense. Okay, so all of these, as I say, will operate in the similar way to that, but each manufacturer will have different methods to try and hinder that. So with the key, they feel smooth, anti-picks, and the way that they're designed cause no difference. You know, and that's why to a lot of people a key is a key, because all they do is put it in the lock and turn it, and that's it. But each manufacturer has their own methods of trying built in security and make them harder. So as I said, the detainer, I mean, this has been around for years, late 50s, 60s. So these have been around longer than I've been around. So these are being picked years and years ago, and methods for opening these, you know, so they all, even though they had a curtain, a method was found to get around it and to understand how to make them work. Okay, so as you can see here, this is our low lift, okay, and this is our high lift. So this is a lever height number 9, this is a lever height number 1. So these are the opposite ends of the spectrum for each of them. Okay, so in order for these to create a gate, as you can see how high this lever has to be lifted. So if I rotate that round, okay, that will give you a better idea. Okay, so you have to remember, you're looking at this back to front, that this lever doesn't really need to be lifted at all, whereas this one does, in order to lift that to the right height for it to engage and create that opening in the lever, so that they're all aligned, or detainer, sorry, they're all aligned to allow that stump to pass through. Okay, now you can see hopefully a little bit better them little notches which are designed to hinder picking, but in all fairness it doesn't really cause much of a problem. In some ways it actually helps, but as I've already discussed, it's the other problems and features in that lock that make them harder to pick open. Our lever number 7 is the high lift, so lever number 7 is the lever that needs to be lifted the highest. Lever number 1 is our low lift. Okay, so all our lows are really from 1 through to 3, and our high lifts are from 4 to 7. Okay, the reason being, although there is a anti-pick in a lever number 3, it doesn't really cause you much bother. So some people may say it needs to go there. When I group them, I put it in here. So we've got 3 lows and 4 highs. Okay, although a high can vary in height and the same as a low, the way that I group them is purely based on the way that their anti-picks are. Other people have their own methods. Okay, so up here, as you can see, let's get one with a clear. So this is a lever height number 5, and this is our anti-pick here. Okay, quite a severe anti-pick looking, but it's not. From a picking point of view, the anti-picks on these are not really a problem. They can be picked out of, but at first you need to understand how the lock operates, read the levers as you're going along, in order to get them to a point that when an anti-pick comes into play, that you can actually deal with that and pick out of it. So going back to an open-ended lever, okay, so these particular levers here belong to a secure fast black. Okay, so the lock that I used here, these levers are from that type of lock, and as you can see, they've got anti-picks in lever 1 at the top anyway. Lever 1, 2, 3, 4, and lever number 5 doesn't. So if I get a lever number 5 and a lever number 4, okay, you can see our anti-pick here with a little tooth sticking out. So when the stump goes into that, that's going to stop the up and down movement of this lever and hinder picking. Whereas here, lever number 5, there's not. Okay, so you could group these in essence that's a low lift and these are high. Okay, they're high in terms that you need to lift them higher than normal to ensure that you're not going to engage the anti-pick, which is at the top. But the problem is, in these ones you have anti-picks in the bottom also. So with them being in the bottom, lever number 3 and lever number 4 can cause you problems again. If you overlift them, the anti-pick's going to engage in there, and that's going to be even harder to try and get out of them. So you have to work out a method to deal with each lock type. Although the levers all operate in the same way, they each have their own factor to hinder picking. So if I bring these two up now, okay, you can see here just a nice flat surface. So if the stump did pass into there, it could still slip up and fall into the gate, whereas on here, if the stump passed into here, it's got that ledge there, it's going to hit against and not go up. So at that point you've overlifted this lever, okay, because you've lifted it too high, it's missed the gate, you've carried on lifting it until it's got to that point and it's jolted in. Now that locks in anti-pick. There is techniques to get out of it, but it really is, once you're proficient, they're the things that you'll spend the time on to learn to do it. But as said, it is something I do teach, but it's not really for an open viewing platform. These levers are from a era Fortress, probably one of the most common locks that people come across. Also the strong bolt. Have I got one to hand? Yeah. Okay, so the strong bolt, so it's got the hex shaped bolt, and the Yale PM version. And have we got a Fortress to hand? Yeah, let's grab the Fortress and a Fortress. Okay, they're basically all the same platform. All exterior, they look different, colours, etc., finishes, but internals all exactly the same. Okay, so as you can see, when they're at their resting point, when these levers are lifted up, they got anti-picks and everything in different positions, and again they still work on the stump passing through that gate. So they all, hopefully it makes sense, that all Mortice lever locks work on the same basis, that it's these that are effectively stopping you from opening it, and you've got to get these levers to a certain point to create a path to allow that stump to pass through. Where on the Fortress there's 7 heights, but on the Yale version and the strong bolt version there's an 8th height. Okay, doesn't really hinder picking or anything, it's more so with the amount of key variations that there are, but in terms of picking it doesn't really cause you any hindrance at all. So with the Fortress and the strong bolt, on the Fortress you get 2 anti-picks, lever 1 and 2, typically you anti-pick. On the strong bolt variation, the lever number 3 has got an anti-pick in the top, and then 4 through till 8 are on the bottom. Okay, so again you can kind of see, so if we get one high lift, which is a lever number 1, and we get a low lift, which is the lowest one in the Fortress, is a lever number 7. Okay, so when the lock is in the lock position, the stump is resting up here. Okay, so when you lifting this lever, okay, so when you're putting upwards pressure, the stump is passing, and then it wants to kick into there and drop into that and give you a false reading that you believe that you lifted that lever to its opening. But experience and practice is going to teach you whether you're in, you've picked that or not. Okay, because really what you want is the stump to be in here. But if you continue, if you've got too much tension and other bad habits, it's quite easy for you to lift that and it gets stuck here, won't go any higher, and you think that you picked and you've overlifted it. Okay, anytime a stump passes and goes to here, it's overlifted. This is where we're aiming for, but we need to be careful and mindful that we don't engage this. Okay, whereas up here at the resting position, the stump is sitting on here in this little shelf. The smallest amount of lift, that stump would want to pass through there. Okay, but again, bad tactics, tension, and not really knowing what you're doing, it's quite easy to overlift that only a little bit. You're hitting there, engage the anti-pick, and if you don't know what you're doing in terms of picking out, you've jammed the lock up, and then you'll find you'll keep resetting. Okay, now you can deal with the anti-picks on these quite easily, but again it's going to come down to experience, practice, and understanding how to read the lock. Okay, so hopefully that's going to make a lot of sense. So again, these can be groups that are lever 1 and 2 in the Fortress. All of the anti-picks are in the top. All the low lifts, the anti-picks, are in the bottom. Okay, and there's nothing to stop you in the top other than the smooth flat finish that the stump's pressing into. Now these are a different level. These are from the era Viscount. Okay, so this lock, Now, as you can see, these anti-picks are quite severe. Okay, so when that's lifted up to its gate, that lever will pass through nicely when it's ready and all the others are lifted to the correct height. But if you lift that too high, okay, you look at that. Now I'm putting inward pressure on that bolt. It's not fully in, but it's enough to stop that from going anywhere else. So if you apply too much tension to that lock, lift that too high, the other levers are lifted a little bit more, that stump will pass into there, and then that jams that up, and then you're either going to have to reset the lock or understand how to get out of that by resetting the lock or by allowing some of them levers to drop. But as you can see here, these anti-picks are extremely severe. Okay, and again, these levers can be grouped. So we've got 3 high lifts, 4 lows, so there's 7 heights. Okay, low because the anti-pick is in the bottom, high because the lever has to be lifted higher but the anti-picks are in the top. Okay, so hopefully this irons out and helps you understand from a lever point of view why, even with them being designed, they don't look the same. They all operate in the same way, in that the end goal is to allow them to be lifted, whether it's sliding up and down by these, pivoted up and down to allow a stump to pass through, whether they're open-ended, closed, H lever or detainer, that they need to all be aligned to create that gate, that path for that stump to pass through. Okay, now these are levers at the bottom here. Ignore these 3 at the top for just the time being. Okay, so these ones at the bottom are from a 3G114, so they're the old version of the Chubb range. Okay, other locks, 3G115 and other variations of Yale and Union, use these levers in some of their locks, and again, not to be confused with the 2134E etc and that range, or the 2101. Just because it's got Chubb Union on them, they're not all the same inside. But this is for the 114, so the old version before they went to the E. They had 8 heights. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now again, they all have varying array of anti-picks. So these have got anti-picks in the top, these are anti-picks in the bottom. So you could say that that's your low lifts, that's your high lifts. Okay, let's bring that in a little bit clearer. So we've got our highs and our lows. Okay, but also what Chubb did is they brought in these 3 levers. Now I've always known them as rapid drop levers. Other people are going to have other names for them, but they were brought in to hinder picking, because it make no difference with the key. Now this is a lever height, if it will show up on the camera down here, you might be able to just make it out. I'm turning it upside down. You might be able to make out there's a number 51. Okay, so the 5 stands for 5 lever. The number 1 is because that's a number 1 height. Okay, then on this one you've got a number 5 again for 5 lever, then the letter A. Okay, I don't know how clear that's going to show. So what Chubb did is they took a lever number 1 and a lever number letter A. Okay, when you put them together, so you align the pockets, you can't, they're the same height. Although there's an extra bit here, it's irrelevant because the key's not interfering with this part. The key interferes with the belly of the lever, which is here. So as you'll notice, there's no anti-pick here. But when we do it this way round, in the lever number 1, there's an anti-pick. Okay, so what was designed to do, so when the levers do slip, okay, if the stump isn't pressing into them levers and holding them up, if you got a lever with a rapid drop is what I call it, so it's a high lift lever but there's no anti-picks in it, as soon as it's got a path it's going to drop and go. It's got nothing to stop it from slipping past the stump, so it'll drop down and again cause you hindrance, or you've got to keep trying to lift it up and it wants to keep dropping and pressing down. Then if this moves and it drops out of the way because there's nothing stopping it, it then could cause that lever to come into play and jolt into the anti-pick. Okay, now they did it with lever 1, lever 2, So a lever 2 then become, so we've got our 2 there, and then our letter 5B. I don't know if you can make that out on the camera, that 5B. So A and 1 is your number 1 and your height. Then we've got our lever B, okay. And again, you can see no anti-pick in the top, but it's the same height other than what I call the toe. But again, as I said, it's irrelevant. That will drop down. And for another method of getting these locks open, them toes and everything can help you in lock ID. Well, yeah, lock ID and decoding. Okay, so 5C is the same as 3. Okay, overlap them, and you see the gates and everything are exactly the same. Still got that toe, but they operate in the same way. So although you've got a 5 lever lock, you've got another variation because you've got a combination of A, B or C lever being in that lock. Now Chubb always tend to have at least one of them. Well, I've only ever come across in factory when they're made, they only ever put one of them levers in. So it'll either be a lever height 1, 2 or 3, and if there's a rapid drop in there, obviously it'll be A, B or C. Where they operate on an ABA pattern, if you've got lever 3 and lever 5 could be a 1, and lever 3, it needs to be the same height, so that could be a letter A, because the key will still lift them because they still lift to the same height. Or again, if it was a lever height 3 in position 3, then position 5 could be a C because the key will still lift them. So hopefully that makes sense on that side. And Chubb are quite awkward for picking, okay, because if you look at them anti-picks, how severe they are, and then the stump itself has got anti-picks, so when they lock tight. They're like that, and you can't really pick out of them. Well, that's a lie to some degree. They can be picked out of, but it's going to be dependent on how much tension you're applying. When you get proficient and you can use light tension, it is possible for you to pick out of them, but 9 times out of 10 you're going to get a slight bit of movement, and just a tad of movement is enough to lock them up solid, and then you'd have to reset. But that's where you learn where your highs are, your lows are, and understand where the anti-pick is. Be mindful of retaining all that information to help you solve that puzzle, and that's how I look at locksmithing, is puzzle solving, okay. And that allows you then to create your path to allow your stump to pass through. Now I'm going to make a mess here, but it's not a problem. So if I bring these levers in, bring them up higher. Now these are the Chubb 3G114E levers, okay, so that's the newer E version of the lock. So it's the more updated one, which was for the European standards, to meet the 2004 onwards BS rating, I think it was, from them. I don't think it was 2007, I think it was 2004 onwards. Again, so instead of being closed lever, they became open lever. So that's an original Chubb 114 lever, so it's closed, but the new ones are open, but the heights are the same. You know, that you could take a 114E key, and as long as you lever the lock upright with the same heights, it will work on a 114. But in terms of relevering them, you couldn't swap the levers in the locks because inside they're designed differently. So the newer one, again, you can group them into your highs and lows, okay. That's got kind of a little bit of an anti-pick in there, so you could separate them and say that's your low lifts, okay, that's your high lifts. And again, Chubb did the same thing. I've only got an A and a B here, but then Chubb introduced high lifts with no anti-picks in the top, and as I say, I refer to them as as rapid drop levers because they just want to be sprung down. You know, there's hardly any resistance to them, to then just want to flick down and hinder picking. I'm just going to put this camera, I'm just going to connect up my external charging source to ensure I don't run out of battery. let me just grab that. Okay, so hopefully that makes a lot of sense to what I was trying to get across in the video. All right, now with anti-picks, okay, so if we use, let's get these ones out of the way. Let's use the Fortress levers as an example, because it's probably easier to see and explain. So we've got our 7, our 6, our 5, our 4, our 3, our 2. The levers are all stamped, okay? So then we group our levers. So lever 1 and 2 is high. Let's get them back up out of the way. There's no visual annoyance. Okay. Now, as I say, in the locks, you're going to typically have 5 levers in each of the locks, but a possibility of any one of these 5 levers being in there in a different array of highs and lows. Okay, so 1 and 2 we've got here, and then we've got our other heights there. Okay, now this is obviously, I'm not going to be able to create ABA because I've only got one of each height on the table here. But let's say, for example, our position 1. So when I'm talking about position 1, that's the lever that's the closest to us when it's in the left hand orientation. Lever number 5 is the furthest one away. If it was on the right hand, lever number 5 is the closest to me. Lever number 1 now is the furthest away. So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about it in the left hand orientation. So lever number 1 is the closest to us. Okay, so say we have in position 1, we have that, then we have a low lift, and then we have position 3, we have a low lift, position 4, we have a high, position 5, we'd have a low. Okay, so we've got a high lift lever because the anti-pick in the top, and a high lever because the anti-pick is in the top again. Okay, now let me see if I can zoom in slightly. Don't know if it's going to allow me to. No, okay. Hopefully it's quite apparent on the video. Okay, so we've got our high. So in a perfect world, when we're picking locks, what we'd really like to do is to get our high lifts up and out the way, because they're the only ones that are going to engage with anti-picks if you're careful with what you're doing. Okay, so when they're tilted to their heights, that would be the perfect scenario, because then we can just go along, and as long as we're careful with how we pick these levers, they're not going to go into anti-pick, okay, because they're in the bottom. So as long as we don't overlift them levers, and we're careful with how we lift each of them lows, we should get an open. Now when you come to a lock, you're not going to know where the highs and lows are. There's various tactics for working that out. Is just going in, nudge the levers until it goes into anti-pick, work out what your highs and lows are, reset the lock, and then next time round you know what you're going to do with the highs. You might have to do it a couple of times to work them all out, but once you've done it, you'll be able to lift all your highs out ideally, and then deal with your lows. But of course, because we don't live in an ideal world, we can't guarantee that the highs are going to lift all of the time and be out of the way for us. So to combat that, we kind of have to take our experience and knowledge and then work with that lock and manipulate it and try and get it to operate in the way that we want. So we may have to, let's just say for argument's sake, lever 2 might bind, we get that up, it's not going to cause any problems because the others are still there, we're not going to go anywhere near the anti-pick. Then we can go to our lever number 1, that's binding now, get that set high because we know it's a high from previous working out. Then we may find that position 3 will bind and that will go. Then position 4 we know was a high, so we can lift that high enough that we know it's not going to engage the anti-pick. Then we could just go along, deal with lever number 5, knowing that there's no anti-picks in it, and that lock will open. So it's a matter of balancing what we're doing with them levers in order to fine-tune what we're doing and understanding to be able to manipulate that lock and control it in the way that we want to. But a lot of the time it's bad habits, and it's not knowing what you're doing. A lot of people feel that they just go in and just lifting the levers. You know, they believe, and it's not their fault, you know, because it's the way it's explained sometimes, is you lift the binding lever. So someone will go in, lift that one because it's binding, lift it as high as they can in the lock. I mean, that's exaggerated, but hopefully it'll make sense. They go in, find the next one that's binding, we lift that, and we that one, and then we lift that, and then all of a sudden all of our levers go as high as they can and nothing's happening. The levers are not moving now, it's jammed solid, and that's because we've overlifted everything. And then other times the problem is people not using enough tension, and they're lifting the lever up, and as soon as they lift it up, it's springing back down, and they test all of them and they're all going up, but they're all coming back down and nothing is doing anything. So you need to, each lock is going to work differently. Even if you have two of the same lock, they're never going to pick exactly the same. And even if you have the keys, you know, this is I think another misconception that people get when you're picking locks and you see it done on a table or anything like that. A lot of people will say, oh well, you had the keys, you know the heights. It doesn't matter, because yes, you have an idea of roughly the height you need to lift them levers, but you still can only operate within the way that the lock allows. The lock will dictate predominantly, but you just need to manipulate it slightly to help you in the direction of the way that you want to go. Okay, so it's an element of, as I said, a puzzle, you know. And when you get a puzzle, you get the box and you get the picture and you know exactly the puzzle that you're doing. But if a real puzzle, you know, you won't have the box, I say, and you've got to try and make it work without knowing the picture, and that would make it probably 10 times as hard. But it doesn't make it any easier necessarily or quicker that you have the box with the picture on it and then you do it within minutes. It still will take you a number of hours depending upon how big that puzzle is. And locksmithing is the same. Just because you have the keys, which is our picture, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to open these locks straight away. Yes, it will give you an idea, but you can still overlift levers, because you're not in a way that you sort of think, right, well, if I lift it there, that's exactly a lever height number 3. I'm going to lift that one, that's exactly a lever height number 5. You know, you're never really going to have that amount of control that even if you can see the keys, you're going to be able to open the lock. You're going to know a rough area, but you're still going to be able to possibly get anti-picks involved or overlift stuff, because it only got to be fractionally over. So it is a little bit of a misconception when you hear that from people, you know, but again, it's just some people's beliefs, and you're never going to make everyone think the same. So this video has been quite long. Hopefully it's brought some understanding to it. If for any reason there's anything else that you think I need to cover or I haven't covered and I'll think about it later and I think I need to add it into the video, I will do so. Okay, just to add into the video, that obviously, as well as the levers having security built into them, also stumps, some of the stumps on some locks have anti-picks built into them. So let's get them to show you. Okay, so you may already picked up on this in the video, but hopefully these will make a little bit more sense. So as I said earlier, this is the stump. Okay, now they come in various forms. This one's quite elongated, got a bit of a chamfer on the top. Okay, this one, again, as you can see, stretches all the way along the length of this bolt. Okay, but there's no anti-picks on here. It's quite rounded. Okay, but it's not really an issue for this one, because being rounded, it doesn't make it any easier or any harder really for picking a lock. So these anti-picks, when you lift, so if you look at that lever that I've underneath the one I've just lifted, okay, if I was to lift that lever out of the way, you can just see I've managed to lift that lever slightly into the anti-pick. Okay, so once that's jammed in there, it causes you headache. So some manufacturers design an anti-pick notch in the stump as well as in their levers. Okay, so you can kind of see in there. So these are a tricky bugger to pick. A lot of the time it's a lot of reset, start again, reset, start again. With this particular lock, so if I put in a particular lever that belongs in there, so we put in a lever height number 2. Okay, so in the rest position, so in the lock position when it's resting, that stump, okay, no anti-pick notch in the actual stump, but when we lift it up, you can see that that engages, okay, and that's in there jammed solid. So even though there's no anti-picks in this, it wouldn't matter if there was, because the actual lever itself contains a deep anti-pick. So you'd have to put a tiny little kick in there again, a little tooth, for it to engage in the stump, and it wouldn't make sense. It would be obviously additional cost to manufacturing. So that is an effective anti-pick enough that it doesn't require it in the stump. But then we move on to the Fortress and the Yale and the strong bolt version. Okay, now you can see that they've got an anti-pick in it, but it's quite shallow. It's not really too much of a problem. When they're brand new and they're sharp, yes, it can be a problem. But if I lift that lever out, you can see the anti-picks there. So if I lift that lever up, get this first one up out of the way, now you can kind of see that that anti-pick has engaged on that second lever behind. Okay, that tooth is engaged in the tooth of the stump. Okay, but again, even with that, you can see I just lifted it up, they still slide through, and you can hear that little notchy sound. So it is possible to pick out of the anti-picks on these locks, but there is a way to do it. And as I said, I do teach it. It's not something that I'm willing to sort of do on here because of it being an open viewing platform. So as a good example on here, so we've got open-ended levers, we've got a small stump, it's not even that big, the stump, okay, it has got an anti-pick notch in it. So if I lift that first lever, the second lever, so I don't think there's any high lifts in this one, they're all lows, so this would be quite an easy lock to pick, to be fair. I think they're all lows anyway, it looks like it, yeah. This one would be quite an easy lock to pick, and oh yes, because it's one of the teaching ones, it's got a pick. So when I'm teaching on there, people can then obviously work in stages of learning on a lock with no anti-picks to then going on to locks with one anti-pick in it, in the other ranges that I've got. So, but you can see there, if I was to overlift that lever, it's not going to show it too well on here because it's not the first lever that binds, but that anti-pick, once it's in there, would cause you some problems. But because of the way that the lever is shaped and the anti-pick, and it's got a little bit of a chamfer there, you can actually ride out of them. Okay, so if you imagine it was in the top. Now this is an old lock, this is the 2101. Now these are, believe it or not, even though they're not British standard or security as such, only by name, these are incredibly awkward. If you look, the levers are actually reverse hung. Okay, so for starters, traditionally, if you're looking at a lock left hand throw, the pivot point is here. You got your lever and it pivots from this point. Okay, on this lock it actually pivots in the opposite direction, so when you're trying to lift and curtain pick, it's a lot harder to lift the lever so close to the pivot point. Okay, it'd be a lot easier if you was picking it at this end, but when you're trying to pick it from here, okay, that makes it extremely heavy to try and lift, so it's quite possible to snap wires if you're not careful. But again, these locks had no anti-picks in them, so none of the levers have got anti-picks. There's no anti-pick on that stump, and again you've got brass levers that are quite glossy and shiny, you can see the glare. So what would happen is you're lifting them up and they're quite slippery, and so if I do it now, I'm applying tension on that bolt, okay, you can kind of see the ones behind, they're quite easy, even with the pressure on, they quite easily slip up and down. So what happened with these, when you're trying to pick them, levers are slipping down, so you end up cranking on more and more tension. The heavier you are with the tension, the more pressure it requires to lift these levers, so they become a bit of a hindrance to pick. So you do kind of have to bully this lock open, which I suppose in one sense is a security feature in one sense, but again, these were pumped out and considered at the time a fairly decent lock. It's just that obviously as times have gone on, methods have been found to open these locks, and obviously everything has to move forward at some point. I don't know if you're going to be able to see too well on that one because of the glare. I just want to sort of hopefully bring everyone up to sort of a speed of how it all works, and as you can see how effective them anti-picks are. So no anti-pick in the stump, but actually just in the lever, but that's enough that that's going to cause you enough hindrance that they don't need it in there, because it'd just be pointless, to be fair. Now with leg, the levers, the H lever that slides up and down, they have a small anti-pick in the, I haven't got one to hand open, it took me a while to do it, but their anti-pick in their stump is so minute. Again, it's a little bit like where's it gone? I just had one. Oh, there. Their anti-pick in their bolt stump is essentially similar to that, but it's probably even shallower than that. So when it engages on the anti-picks on these levers, okay, there's no anti-pick on that one, so that one's quite free to move up and down and slip and cause you problems. Whereas the anti-pick here, although they don't typically, these ones don't cause you too much problem, but you can see the indentation there. But again, because it's got a bit of a radius on it, okay, they're not sharp as such like the Chubb range, that when they engage they're easy to kind of manipulate out of. So anti-picks don't stop you from picking out of, where a lot of people will reset the lock and then keep going ahead. You know, when you've got the tactics and the understanding and the knowledge of how to deal with anti-picks, you'll make your life so much easier going forward. So that's all I really wanted to add, and hopefully that's everything that you need to know for the time being. But please like, share, subscribe. Any other further info that you require, just put it in the comments below, or if you've got any ideas that you want me to go into, or any more further into these. Obviously I'm not going to go through the process of how to pick as such, okay? There's videos of me picking locks and I'll give away some tips and tricks, but it wouldn't be right of me to go on and explain it all. There's other people that do it, but for me it's not something that I want to disclose, because it is quite sensitive information, I believe. But again, it's just personal preference. So thanks again, guys.